When you do that, the inner critic will automatically get quieter and you don't need to manage it. Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Lorena and I am a somatic self-concept and manifestation coach, and I support women to shift their self-concept, step into and embody a new identity and a new state of being in a very sustainable way so that you can align with your potential, with your soul desires, and make anything that you want in life manifest. Nothing is impossible. We are essentially bridging the gap between who you currently are and who you desire to be or become. If you like this type of content, then please subscribe to my channel and switch on the little notifications bell because YouTube algorithm. And if you like this particular video, then please leave a like. I also love hearing from you in the comments. And lastly, I do encourage you to check out the links in the description box below because there's a bunch of free resources like masterclasses and guidebooks, and you also find information on how to work with me, how to be coached by me in the description box as well. Now let's dive in. We're going to talk about your inner critic today. So I don't think I need to explain what your inner critic is because we all have it. Every human being on the planet has an inner critic. So your inner critic is basically the part of you that constantly criticizes you, that says mean things to you. It can be your inner mean girl. It can put you down. It can call you names. It can be pretty cruel. It can also just be nagging somewhere in the background, telling you that you're not good enough or that you didn't do something well enough. And it's part of the human psyche. It's essentially just a part of us that wants us to do better, that wants us to improve. But it is often born out of experiences that didn't make us feel very good about ourselves. So maybe your inner critic wasn't as alive when you were a child. Probably not, right? But then over time, when you maybe noticed that your parents were disappointed when you didn't get the grades they expected in school, or you were picked last for PE class, and it created certain beliefs in your system where now your inner critic comes out in certain situations to protect you from the same experiences that you made back then and the same emotional charges that you experienced back then. And when it comes to your self-concept, your identity, your way of being, your beliefs about yourself, who you are, how you show up in the world, how you feel about yourself and how you perceive yourself, your inner critic is a part of your self-concept. It essentially belongs to you. Now, your inner critic can be pretty loud and nagging and annoying and hard to kind of block out depending on the circumstances, but there can also be a level of unconscious presence of your inner critic. So some of it you're actively here, you're aware of, other aspects of it or other times it's present you might not notice because it's so unconscious. And when it comes to the unconscious, I addressed this in last week's video, so I'm not going to go deep into it, but a lot of people will just tell you to become aware of the unconscious thought by essentially keeping track of it, keeping track of what's going on in your consciousness. So watching your every thought, watching your every sentence that you're saying, which is pretty hard to do because you're not always conscious, right? I mean, mentally conscious, physically conscious, hopefully most times you are. But even if you could be, it's pretty exhausting to keep your mind in check. But whilst your inner critic sometimes is conscious, sometimes you do just hear it, and that's probably why you clicked on this video and why you want to manage it or deal with it differently. The source of your inner critic comes from your subconscious mind or from a subconscious part in your psyche. And I could geek out on the subconscious for hours. It's such a vast topic. It's so complex. It's such an interesting world. It's full of color and symbolism. But what's important is that your subconscious is not purely mental, because it's often your emotional body or your physical body, your nervous system that's reacting first before thought comes in. And that's why I suggest you to go way beyond just the mind and to actually connect to the body and to reprogram your beliefs and your identity in the body, which is why the approach that I teach and that I coach my clients through is based on somatics, is based on feeling more than it is on thought, although mindset is of course also something that we work on. And I'm mentioning this in this context because the way most people manage, even the word manage just kind of falls in this context, but more on that in a moment. The way most people approach their inner critic is through reassurance, through positive self-talk. So you might have something come in like, you're stupid. You say something wrong. You say something wrong, you make a mistake, or you pronounce something wrong. That happens to me sometimes because English is not my first language. And someone laughs at you and your inner critic comes in and says, you're so dumb. You're so stupid. So with that examples of you're so stupid, you might then go, I'm not stupid. I'm actually pretty smart. I just made a mistake, right? So you could basically tell your inner critic that whatever it's criticizing is not actually true. There can also be more loving and compassionate reassurance depending on what's coming up. Maybe if you notice that it says something about your worth, then you might opt for some conversation with your inner child, right? You might tell the childlike part in you, you matter, you're important, I love you. These are all things that I suggest you to do too, that can definitely be useful, especially when it's things that are that simple. But what we can't forget is that how the inner critic manifests and how it expresses itself comes from a deeper root in your psyche, in your consciousness, in your subconscious. So the you're so stupid might just come from, oh, someone has said this to you before, someone has laughed at you before, and you just embody this belief of, I'm so stupid when I say something wrong, when I make a mistake. In that case, it would be quite simple to just reassure yourself. But it could also be that this automatic inner talk of you're so stupid actually comes from a deeper part inside of you that believes it's not worthy of love, that believes it's always going to be humiliated, that it's not good enough. Now, if there's a deeper core, a deeper root to this, and most of the time there is, then just reassuring yourself will not solve the problem. It will just solve it temporarily on a surface level. But what you really need to look at are these deeper beliefs, and you actually need to transmute them. You actually need to shift them in your subconscious and in your body rather than just in your mind. So that's why that's important to mention. But that being said, I want to give you just some basic techniques or some basic tools on how to deal with your inner critic, bearing in mind that this is something that usually happens over time, that often requires deeper work, and that I actually do really advise you to get support, to get professional support, to get a coach or a mentor for, if you really want to shift these deeper beliefs in your consciousness about your self-concept, about yourself. Because when you do that, the inner critic will automatically get quieter and you don't need to manage it. But how do we deal with our inner critic? Firstly, what you resist persists. That's important because when you constantly talk against your inner critic, it might actually just get louder. So if it comes in and it says you're so stupid, and it comes from a deeper core wound or core belief, and you say, no, I'm not, actually it might just get louder. It might just go, yeah, you freaking are. So reassuring is one thing. It can be nice in the moment, it can be needed in the moment. Flipping the thought, counteracting it, pushing it away, telling it doesn't matter, or fighting it, that will not work, at least not in the long run. It might be something that you can push away in the moment, but it will fester in your subconscious further. So don't resist it, just let it be there. It's often coming up because it just wants to warn you. The important thing is that your inner critic is not against you, even though it might have that energy in terms of the things that you hear or the things that it says or the tone of voice that you hear in your mind, but it's not your enemy, and it actually just wants to most likely warn you or protect you from something. So secondly, I then encourage you to actually listen to it. Find the meaning or message that it has for you. This is about being discerning and not blindly trusting. So for example, if your inner critic comes in when you go on a first date and it says you'll never find anyone, there is maybe a bit of a blessing in that statement. Although it seems pretty harsh or pretty mean, maybe it just wants you to be the best version of yourself. Maybe it just wants you to keep an eye out for the red flags that might come up on this date. It's not all bad. And although it can show itself in a pretty mean or harsh way, it's not all negative. Which brings me to befriend your inner critic. Start building a relationship with it. Start getting to know it. When does it come up? What kind of stuff does it say? Is anything repeating over and over again? And again, on a mental level, that can come through conversations. So you can talk to it and just get curious. But more so, it's about building a relationship with this part of yourself, with this aspect of yourself over time. When we bring this work, however, down to the core beliefs, down to the root of where things began, and this is not about time, this is not about knowing when something happened, but the sensation of where something began, the feeling that you're still holding on to in your body, the belief that you're still holding on to deep inside. When we heal that, or when we shift that, your inner critic automatically gets quieter. That's something that happened to a client of mine who had a pretty harsh inner critic that would constantly come up. Nothing was ever good enough. Whatever she did, whatever social situation was in, there was constant nagging in her head, and it was really persistent and really bothering her. And it was more like intrusive thoughts to a point. And when we worked together, over time, she didn't have to manage her inner critic. We didn't actually work on that specifically. We worked on the root beliefs underneath, the core beliefs and the core emotions underneath. And over time, that inner critic just got pretty quiet. It just was so persistent before, and it just started shutting up. Now, obviously, this took time. We did a lot of emotional integration work. She began to see the changes pertaining to her inner critic, I think 5 weeks in. It required a lot of deep work to get to this place, especially long term, but she didn't have to tell it to be quiet. She didn't have to flip her thoughts, which is what she had been trying to do before. So that's really important. You need to bring a lot more compassion and curiosity and care to it rather than resisting it or fighting it. Also, don't let it win, right? Like, you're not just letting it take over and remain part of your identity. You're not just going to accept it all as true, but also don't fight it, don't resist it, because that's not going to help you. So my inner critic can be a bit of a perfectionist, I'll be honest, and I would love to know from you what your inner critic tells you, where you're sometimes like, can this voice just... Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in next week's video.